Before I saw the crater, before I heard the jungle screaming, I understood one thing with perfect clarity. Something had fallen from the sky, something alive was trapped inside it, and Catachan had already decided it belonged to the jungle. The earth under my right cheek was wet, sour with rot and moss, and something warm, something meaty, as if the belly of a great hunting beast had been opened nearby and hidden beneath the leaves. I opened my eyes and saw red mud, and in that mud I saw my right hand. My fingers were clenched around my machete. I did not remember drawing it from the sheath. The body remembers what the mind forgets. On Catachan, that is the first lesson you learn before you learn to walk. Beneath me the ground trembled, faint and steady, as though deep below us someone was striking bone with an enormous hammer. The roots were reacting. The root system here feels a shock wave faster than a commissar hears a whisper about desertion. Something had fallen, something heavy. I lifted my head and saw the crater. It was 20 meters across. The trees around it, the ones that had survived, were burning. But trees do not burn on Catachan the way they burn on sane worlds. They burn and scream. Resin bladders burst along the trunks. Steam hissed from torn bark. I could pick that sound out from a dozen others because I had heard it for as long as I had been alive. When the jungles of Catachan howl, it means they are angry. When they are angry, anything that moves becomes food. No exceptions. Chunks of hull plating lay scattered across the crater, red metal marked with gilded symbols, a cog and a skull. Adeptus Mechanicus, escape pod. I stood. My knees rang, my right ear whined, my bandana was soaked with sweat and soot, but I was on my feet. I looked around. My lads, 4 men from first section, were already standing along the rim of the crater. Corporal Nerk held his las rifle ready and gave me a silent nod. The other 3, Silas, Vel, and Torin, covered their sectors. Silent. No questions, no panic. Catachans do not panic. Catachans work. Somewhere behind the trees was second section. I heard Sergeant Kestra give a low whistle, sending the signal. All alive. 11 people from my patrol, a mixed group from second platoon, still in one piece. For now. We had been patrolling the base perimeter. A standard 3-day sweep of the southern sector. Nothing unusual on Catachan. Nothing unusual meant that by morning we had lost only 1 pair of boots. Bren had stepped into a puddle that turned out to be the mouth of some underground filth, and it ate the leather off his sole in 20 seconds. He walked barefoot for the rest of the day and did not complain. The sole of a Catachan foot is almost another pair of boots, a natural tread grown over 20 years of walking on roots, stones, and things best left unnamed. Then the fireball came down from the sky. We thought it was a meteorite. Meteorites are common on Catachan. The atmosphere is thick and wet, but it lets through anything large enough. The pod entered the jungle canopy like an artillery shell, smashing the upper level, setting the crown ablaze, tearing vines apart. The shock waved through us to the ground, me face first into the mud, the others wherever the jungle chose to put them. Nerk, heavy and wide as a trunk, stayed upright. He said he only swayed. He was probably lying, but I was not about to test him. The pod lay in the center of the crater, nose buried in clay. The hull was white hot. Steam leaked from the cracks, and mold was already beginning to curl around it. The first scouts of the jungle. In an hour the hull would be covered in lichen. In 2 hours the first vines would start wrapping around the landing struts. In 6 hours the wild growth would swallow the pod, the way it had swallowed dozens of bunkers, 3 automated perimeter turrets, and 1 unlucky lieutenant who fell asleep on watch and woke up inside the stem of a miral trap. I approached the pod. The hatch had been welded shut by impact, standard landing deformation. From inside came a quiet rhythm, metal striking metal, and I understood that someone inside was alive, someone whose limbs were metal. Nerk, give me the pry bar. Nerk tossed it to me. a foot and a half of Catachan steel forged in a field furnace. I drove it into the seam and on the third try snapped away the emergency panel. The hatch hissed, releasing a bitter cloud, and I saw him. Or rather, I saw what had once been a man. Red robes darkened by heat, two augmetic legs set into heavy support frames. The left arm ended in a manipulator, and a pair of mechadendrites behind his back were curled like the tails of dead serpents. The right hand was alive. At least, that was what I thought then. There was almost no face to see. The lower half was covered by a carved vox grill, an augmetic mask, silver and delicate, etched with microscopic prayers. The left eye was a red lens, the right covered by a metal plate. Cables ran from beneath the hood straight into the skull. Servo skulls circled his head, 3 of them, real human skulls wrapped in sensors and grav plates linked by sacred cables. Their antigrav modules hummed and green sensor lights flickered. One turned a scanning beam on me. I felt a prickling pass over my skin. Then he spoke. Binaric, crackle, click, sharp, modulated bursts. It makes a normal man clench his teeth. I did not understand a word, but I understood the tone. The tone was an order, commanding, certain, absolutely incapable of imagining refusal. As though he were not inside a mangled pod on the most dangerous world in the Imperium, but standing on the bridge of a cruiser. Speak a normal language, I said. Gothic, low Gothic, anything I can understand. Pause, the servo skulls shifted formation. The red lens blinked. I am Magos Biologies Elian Varro, Order of Genetors, Expeditionary Corps of the Forge Acropolis. The voice came through the grill like a shovel scraping stone. My vessel was damaged by orbital debris. The pod made an emergency landing. I require evacuation. Immediately. Welcome to Catachan, I said. There will be no evacuation for at least 16 hours. The nearest Vox point is Fort Redbone, 70 kilometers northwest. On foot. Unacceptable. My cargo requires immediate delivery. I carry data of critical importance to Mars. Do you have legs? I possess 4 locomotor appendages, 2 of which are modified for. Then you walk like everyone else. I turned my back on him and looked at the jungle. A wall of green 20 to 30 meters high, 50 in places. Vines as thick as my leg. And somewhere inside that green mass, everything that had smelled the explosion, the fire and fresh meat was waking up. I adjusted my bandana, wiped soot from my cheek and whistled. 2 short, 1 long. We move now. He walked behind me, but he did not merely walk. He calculated. I heard his servo skulls dive between the trees, heard their sensors clicking as they gathered data. Every 3 minutes he stopped, and from his left hand, the one that ended in something like a mechanical spider with a dozen joints, a blue beam shot out. A hologram. A topographic map, elevation lines, biomass density, thermal anomalies. Beautiful, absolutely useless. Optimal route, vector 317. Deviation from direct line, no more than 4 degrees. Estimated time of arrival, 1942. I stopped without turning. Where does your vector 317 go? Directly to the extraction point. A straight line provides minimal path length and therefore minimal exposure time in a hostile environment. Your vector 317 goes through the throat. Clarify parameters of object throat. A swamp, 2 kilometers of sucking sludge. 6 species of predator live in it, 3 species of venomous mold and breathing grass. 1 breath is enough to turn your lungs, if you still have lungs, into paste. Nobody goes through the throat. Never, not even us. Catachan gravitational anomaly logged. The term swamp is incorrect. It is a zone of high biological activity with elevated methane and ammonia content. It is the throat, and we are not going in. I led the squad east along an old hunting trail, one we had cut 2 seasons earlier. Of course the trail was overgrown. On Catachan, any trail grows back in a week, but trees remember an axe. They scar more slowly than they grow. If you know where to look, you can see old cuts. To us, they are road signs. The Magos followed me in silence for exactly 7 minutes. Then he activated the hologram again. Your route increases the distance by 31%. Inefficient. I will register a breach of cooperation protocol in my report. Register it. Nerk, walking to my left, turned his head a fraction and looked at me. I knew that look. Maybe cut his throat quietly. On Catachan, we have our own tradition for dealing with commissars who meddle in things they do not understand. Tech priests are not commissars, but the principle is the same. I shook my head. No, this cargo has to be delivered alive. Orders. Torin walked rearguard, built like a mangrove trunk and just as quiet. 20 years on Catachan, 4 combat deployments beyond it, and he considered none of them more dangerous than an ordinary Tuesday at home. He carried a heavy bolter on his shoulder, the way other men carry a laundry sack. From time to time he looked not behind, but up. On Catachan, death comes from above more often than from anywhere else. We walked for 3 hours. The Magos did not lag. His mechanical legs worked evenly and never tired. But every time the trail ducked under a root or bent around a cluster of thorn stems, he stopped and recalculated. Every time his hologram showed a straight line. Every time I ignored that line. In the 4th hour, he simply stopped following me. I heard it before I saw it. A crackle, quiet at first, then louder. The mechanical whine of his mechadendrites extending and beginning to cut vines, opening a path straight along Vector 317. 2 servo skulls darted forward, lighting the way with green beams. Magos, stop. He did not hear or did not listen. With these 10 saints you can never tell. Silas, who was closest to the tech priest, reacted first. He sprinted after him, but the Magos had already cut 10 meters into the growth, into ground where there was no trail, where we had never cleared a way. I ran. When I reached them, Silas stood 2 paces from the Magos and did not move, frozen in the way men freeze when they know that the next motion will be the last. Myral trap. A ground cover plant that looks like ordinary grass, soft, gray-green, harmless. The roots of a myral trap feel vibration. Tendrils, not leaves and not stems, strike instantly with a paralyzing venom. A man becomes a motionless doll, and then the trap drags him under the soil and digests him. Slowly, over 4 days. The Magos was standing directly on it. His metal legs did not transmit vibration the way living flesh does, and the trap could not feel him. It could feel Silas. He stood on the edge, and I saw a stem shifting beneath his right boot, measuring him. Silas, quiet, do not breathe. I drew my machete and lowered myself to my knees. I cut 3 stems at the base. Yellow sap, stinking and caustic, spattered the blade. The 4th stem twitched, and I chopped it with 1 fast stroke. Silas took 1 step back, then another, then a 3rd. Then the ground behind him shuddered. Torin, he had followed us, heavy as a lemon russ. Every one of his steps carried 30 kilos of living weight and 20 kilos of kit into the ground. The trap woke. Tendrils lashed up from under the turf, 6 whips at once. Torin shouted, not from pain, from anger. 1 tendril wrapped his left ankle, another his wrist. The venom began to work in a second. I saw his left arm go slack, fingers opening. The bolter fell. Nerk drew his knife and cut the tendrils around the ankle. I hacked the ones reaching for his throat. Vel scored the root mass with a Laz beam, and the trap shrieked with a vibration that made my teeth itch. But the venom was already in him. Torin lay on his back, eyes open, mouth open, and not a single muscle moving. Alive, conscious, paralyzed from neck to heel. The Magos stood 3 meters away and watched. The red lens recorded. The servo skulls circled, fixing data. He did not move. I stepped close enough that my nose almost touched his Vox grill. I smelled incense, promethium, and something sour copper, like old blood. One more trick like that, I said quietly, so my men would not hear, and I leave you here with your data, your skulls, and your optimal vector. In 3 days there will be nothing left of you but a rusty skeleton in red rags. Do you understand me? The red lens blinked, a long pause. I have registered your statement. Good, now help carry him. We carried Torin on a litter made from cut branches for another 4 hours. The venom of a myral trap lets go after a day if you are lucky, if the body is strong. Torin had a strong body. 20 years of Catachan is stronger than any antidote. As we walked, I thought about how all of this must look through the eyes of our passenger. He falls onto a death world. In his slate he has a file, a number, a category, a threat level, statistics and classifications. Mortis extremis, a fine phrase. Then a sample of local flora grabs your soldier by the leg, and you stand there unable to help, unable to run, unable even to understand what happened because your database has no line that says, "Plant eats people," and all you can do is watch. I had seen men like Magos Varro before. Visitors. They arrive from orbit with clean hands and full data banks. They know everything about Catachan that can be known without ever setting foot on Catachan. Statistics, taxonomy, species aggression indexes. They know that a myral trap paralyses. They do not know what it is to stand over a paralyzed friend, while he stares at you with eyes full of terror and cannot even scream. The difference between data and knowledge is Catachan mud under the nails. At the halt, after we had set Torin down and checked the perimeter, I found the Magos doing something strange. He was kneeling before a myral trap, not the one that had stung Torin, but a small young one pushing from beneath a root 2 meters from camp, and he was touching it with his living hand, his right hand, stroking the tendrils with his fingertips carefully, the way one strokes a sleeping animal. The trap moved but did not attack. It was too small to handle anything larger than a rat. I almost shouted, "Get away from it, fool." But I stopped because I saw his face, or rather his lens. It flickered very fast as if recording, cataloging. But not the way a machine records data, differently. Like a man touching snow for the first time, and unable to believe it is cold. The Magos followed us in silence after that. He did not activate the hologram again, but I saw his servo skulls turn toward me again and again, studying, recording. I was a specimen to him, biological material for a database. I was used to that. On Catachan, everything from an ant to the largest beast looks at you as food. At least he looked at me as a lesson. Rain began at dawn. If dawn is what you call the moment when the leaden sky of Catachan changes from black to gray. I heard the first drops by their sound. Not the soft tapping of normal rain, but a hiss, as if water had been thrown onto a hot pan. Acid rain, common in that season. The atmosphere of Catachan stores the exhalations of the upper jungle, then spits them back down. Spores, acid enzymes, microscopic predators. It all falls from above, eating cloth, skin, and most unpleasantly metal. I whistled. Everyone knew the procedure. Each fighter pulled a piece of oiled cloth from his kit bag, a cloak sheet if you believe the Munitorum, a rag against death if you believe us, and threw it over his head and shoulders. From our boots we pulled the insoles. Beneath them, in small pockets, lay a black tarry substance, swamp pitch. On Catachan we draw it from dead trees that sank into the mire and lay there long enough to soak through with mineral deposits. It smells like rotten fish mixed with burnt rubber, but it neutralizes acid. We smeared it on face, neck, hands, every patch of open skin, quickly by habit without thinking. Magos Varro stood and watched. Magos. I held out a lump of pitch to him, dark brown and oily, the size of a fist. Smear it on. The acid will eat your joints in half an hour, seep into the seams, start corroding the alloy. This filth will protect you. Pause. Unacceptable. The composition of this substance has not been certified by Mars. I cannot allow uncertified organic material to contact sanctified mechanisms. That is techno-heresy. I blinked. Techno-heresy. Correct. Every joint assembly of my body was blessed in the rite of sacred oiling at the forge acropolis. Application of foreign substances violates the integrity of the blessing. Magos, in 20 minutes your blessed joints will rust, and you will not be able to move a finger. The machine spirit of my augmetics is strong enough to resist atmospheric effects. I do not require primitive methods. The rain grew heavier. The servo skulls died first. Their antigrav modules, small and delicate as clockwork, were the most sensitive. Acid ate through the protective shells in 10 minutes. The first skull smoked. Its sensor lens burst with a soft pop, and it dropped into the mud like a stone. The second lasted longer, perhaps 15 minutes, but then its drive screeched, coughed, and the skull began darting blindly between the trees like a bat. It slammed into a trunk and burst apart. The third simply stopped flying, settled softly onto the ground, blinked its lens, and went dark. The Magos watched each one die with the stillness of a statue. I do not know what he felt. With a face that is not a face, you cannot tell. But his mechadendrites, the ones that usually swayed behind him in a smooth, slow rhythm, stiffened as if they had flinched and frozen. Then the joints began to lock. First the left knee. His mechanical leg jerked and froze half-bent. He tried to put his weight on the right. The right elbow locked. One mechadendrite, usually coiled behind his back, stretched out and froze like a stick. He stood in the middle of the trail under the acid downpour, looking like a broken marionette. His red robes darkened with wet, and steam rose from the seams between plates. The acid had reached the inner circuits. I walked up to him. Last offer. I cannot initiate the protocol. His Vox grill rasped, scraped, then went silent. I looked at Nerk. He nodded. Together we knocked him down. I took the torso, Nerk the legs. He was heavy, 150 kilos with all his iron, and we laid him face upward straight into a puddle of swamp muck. The mud sucked and folded around his robes, filling the gaps between plates. Then I did something I had never done in my life, and something I will never tell a regimental preacher in confession. I took a full handful of that black reeking pitch and started packing it straight into the joints, into elbows, knees, the spaces between ribs and chest plates. With my hands, with my fingers, forcing the filth deeper until every crack was plugged. The Magos lay in the mud and did not move. Perhaps he could not, perhaps he would not. When I was finished, he looked like a swamp corpse. His red robes had turned brown-black. The joints were packed with lumps of pitch. The face, what remained of it, was smeared with mud. The Vox grill bubbled. Can you stand? Silence. Then a quiet scrape. His left knee twitched, slowly bent with a crunch, then straightened. The pitch worked. It filled the micro cracks, neutralized the acid, lubricated the joints that had begun to rust. He rose slowly, heavily, like an old man. He stood before me, covered in mud, stripped of his servo skulls, with mechadendrites hanging like wet ropes. I waited. I expected rage, accusations of techno-heresy, a threat of tribunal something. He said one word in Binharic. I did not understand it, but Nerk had served 3 months with an engineer corps once and had picked up a few things. He translated. Registered. Torin, who by then could move his fingers while the venom let go slowly, centimeter by centimeter, lay on the litter and looked at the Magos, then at me, then back at the Magos. The first word his throat managed to force through the remains of the paralysis was pretty. He meant the tech priest had been pretty before the mud bath. I snorted. Torin is a man of few words, but when he speaks, he hits the mark. Magos Varro looked as though he had been turned inside out, dragged through a swamp, and left to dry badly. His red robes were brown. The golden engraving on his breastplate, the one praising the Omnissiah, was glued over with pitch. His mechadendrites hung behind him, caked in mud like the tails of dead eels. And he walked in silence. No complaint, no hologram, no route recalculation. He simply walked behind me, placing his mechanical feet where I placed mine, step for step, as I teach recruits on their first march. Something had broken in that binary mind, or perhaps something had repaired itself. I could not yet tell which. I had no time to think about it. The rain ended, and the jungle, fed by acid moisture, woke. Vines swelled and reached for the light like hungry hands. Insects that had survived the downpour in cocoons and holes crawled out by the thousands, by the millions, filling the air with a hum that made the ears clog. Blood wasps, small and cruel with stingers that punched through uniform cloth, circled over our heads. We walked faster because a swarm that takes an interest in prey can strip a man to bone in an hour. I looked back at the Magos. He was swatting at them with his living hand, clumsy and childlike, like a man who had never had to wave away insects because he lived in sterile forge corridors where the only flying things were servo skulls. I threw him a strip of oiled cloth. "Wrap your neck and face, they go for the ears." He caught the cloth, looked at it, looked at me, and wrapped himself. Silently, not one word about uncertified materials. Lesson learned. We went on. The rain had lasted 4 hours. Spore release begins without warning. More precisely, there is a warning, but only those born here hear it. Birds, if the creatures on Catachan can be called birds with 6 wings and teeth, all fall silent at once as if someone turned a switch. Insects hide. Even the vines, usually shifting slowly toward the light, stop moving. The jungle holds its breath. Then from the low ground came a dense spore cloud, milk white and heavy, creeping through the lower jungle, wrapping trunks, filling every hollow. The local mycelium exhaled, billions of spores in the air. Almost at once came the electromagnetic front, one of the local anomalies Catachan likes to use on machinery and nerves. I can feel it on my skin, a faint tingling like ants moving over the hands. We are used to it, not because it does nothing to us, but because we recognize it early and endure the first wave. We narrow our eyes, hold our breath, wrap the face in wet cloth, and keep moving. For Magos Varro, the magnetic storm was the end of the world. I heard him stop. Not heard, felt. When 150 kilos of metal is walking behind you and suddenly goes silent, you notice. I turned. He stood gripping a tree trunk with a mechadendrite. His red lens blinked fast and ragged like an emergency beacon. The Vox grill spat fragments of binaric, disconnected, panicked. I caught the word noosphere and then failure, repeated perhaps 20 times. Magos, report status. Interference has flooded all sensor channels. Noospheric link absent. Internal compass failure. Database inaccessible. Lens blind. Augers dead. I see only noise, all noise. His voice, the mechanical scrape I had grown used to, trembled. For the first time in 2 days, there was something living in it. Fear, bare primitive fear, not covered by binary logic. I understood what had happened. The electromagnetic front had finished what acid and mud had not. Damaged sensors, joints packed with pitch, corroded circuits. All of it had already been working by force, and now the interference cut the last threads. Noosphere, compass, database, augmented sight dead. The lens received only white noise instead of infrared. He was trapped inside his own body, in a blind, deaf, disconnected metal shell. And he was afraid. "Nerk Kestra, take him." We got him under the arms. Nerk on the right, me on the left, heavy. His mechanical legs still moved, but without coordination. They stepped wrong, too wide, then too narrow, like a drunk. Magos, I am Sergeant Joran Vale, Catachan Jungle Fighters, 22nd Regiment. Listen to my voice, only my voice. We are moving northwest. Roots underfoot long and slick, wider step, wider good, branch at head height, duck. I guided him like a blind man, like a recruit on his first jungle march, when he does not yet know every bush wants to eat him, and you take his elbow and say, "Follow me, do not let go, look where I put my foot." Magos biologists, ranked above any general in my chain of command, bearer of data critical to Mars, and I guided him like a frightened pup. The spore cloud hung for 6 hours. For 6 hours we walked through pale fog, and I did not let go of his elbow for a second. I spoke continuously, quietly, evenly. Described the path, counted steps, warned of roots, holes, hanging vines. Vel walked ahead with his machete cutting away. Kestra covered the rear. Torin, recovered from the paralysis but still unsteady, limped beside us and said nothing. At some point about 3 hours in, the Magos spoke quietly, without the usual metallic command tone. "Sergeant Vale." "Listening." "I cannot process the data. The databases are inaccessible. I do not know how to classify what is happening. My response protocols contain no scenario for total sensory failure outside a controlled environment. I am not prepared for this. He fell silent. A mechadendrite hanging behind his back jerked once, then again, like a hand searching for something to hold and finding nothing. "Magos, do you know what Catachan is?" "Death world, class mortis extremis, population negligible by imperial measure, primary export military personnel, flora and fauna extremely aggressive, Mars recommendation minimal contact, short-term evacuation. Catachan is the place where you learn to live without everything. Without maps, without compass, without vox, without weapon, without food, without eyes if you must. My grandfather lost both eyes to the strike of a black thorn cobra when he was 20. He lived 30 more years, hunted, killed, without eyes. Do you know how?" Silence. He listened. He listened to the jungle breathing. He heard a snake crawl by the sound of scales on leaves. He heard the wind change direction when a predator crouched ahead. He smelled the difference between a miral trap and ordinary grass. I tightened my grip on his elbow. "Your machines are broken, Magos. Your machine spirit sleeps, but you still have something Mars cannot certify or bless. You still have a body, weak, soft, imperfect, but alive, and while it is alive, it works. Breathe, listen, follow me." A long pause. "Registered." Somewhere in the 3rd hour, a black thorn cobra blocked our way. I smelled it first, dry and dusty with a note of ammonia. It lay across the path, coiled in 3 rings, seeming endless in the spore fog. 2 meters of body covered in scales black as coal, each scale ending in a tiny thorn. Black thorn venom kills in 30 heartbeats. You do not have time even to say goodbye. Still, I whispered, "Do not move, nobody move." The Magos froze. I could feel his mechanical arm, the one I was holding, vibrating faintly. Some residual current in the circuits. What is happening?" His voice through the grill was quieter than usual. "Snake on the path. Black thorn cobra. One of the Catachan creatures with less than a minute between bite and grave. Black thorn cobra, Catachan subspecies. Neurotoxin. Lethal dose 0.03 milligrams per kilogram of body mass. Action time under 30 seconds. I know the data. Quiet, the data can wait." Slowly, millimeter by millimeter, I crouched. I found a small smooth stone on the ground and rolled it to one side, away from the path. The stone whispered through the leaves. The cobra turned its head toward the sound, fast as a whip. It froze, listened, then slowly, unwillingly, uncoiled and slipped away into the undergrowth. I exhaled. Data says it kills in 30 seconds. Data does not say it is lazy when it is fed, and that you can trick it with sound. That knowledge is not from a catalog, Magos. That is from life. He said nothing, but the arm I held stopped vibrating. We went on. I smelled them before I saw them. A sharp ammonia stink, like concentrated predator urine mixed with something bitter-sweet. On Catachan, every smell is a message. This smell said, territory occupied, leave or die. Catachan Devil. We had crossed into its ground. I raised a fist. The squad froze, 12 people. No, 11. Torin was still limping and lagging. They stood between the trees without moving. Nerk came up soundlessly and bent to my ear. Vale, I saw the marks. On the trunks were deep grooves, parallel even 2 meters above the ground. Claw marks each as wide as my finger. Fresh. The resin had not sealed them. Young one, I whispered. 10 or 12 meters, probably solitary, might have split from the nest. Or might not have. True, Catachan devils keep broods, adults and young together. If we were on the ground of a nest, one 7-meter arthropod with mandibles and armor was only the beginning. There was nowhere to fall back. Behind us the throat, left a rock drop, right a wall of thorn vine so dense no machete could open it fast enough. The only path was forward, through devil territory. Move quiet, stretch the line, 5 meters between each, weapons ready. Do not fire unless you must. A miss will wake the whole forest. If it charges, aim for the eyes, for joints under the armor, grenades under the belly, knife only if it is already on you. You know this. They knew. Every one of them had killed his first venomous thing at 10. At 15, they had survived predator breeding season. At 20, some of them had hunted devils for the rite of passage. For a Catachan, killing a devil is like a hive noble receiving an order. Except our order is a scar across half the body and emptiness in the eyes when you remember how your partner died. We walked for 20 minutes, quiet, slow. I counted steps like a prayer. On the 217th step, the ground beneath me lifted. From below, from under the roots and packed rotting leaves, a body shot upward like a piston, like a fist striking the earth from beneath. Segmented, chitinous, dark green with black stripes. A young devil, 7 meters but fast, faster than you can believe a body can turn. It struck with a front scythe limb. The chitin blade, as long as my machete, hissed half a meter from my face. I jumped back, fell, rolled. Kestra fired. Allah's beam scratched across the carapace and left a melted line. The devil did not notice. Its mandibles, each the size of my forearm, snapped shut, and Sila's, who stood closest, vanished. One movement. Mandibles closed, crack. I heard that crack through my own shout. Sila's was gone, swallowed. Second strike. Vel. A segmented limb with a chitin spike drove into his chest below the right shoulder. Clean, without resistance, like a knife into butter. Vel looked at the spike jutting from him with surprise more than pain. Then his eyes rolled back and he fell. Back, everyone back. But there was no back, because from behind the trees, from under roots and from cracks between stones, the rest came crawling. Juveniles, smaller, 3 or 4 meters each, but quick, vicious, shrieking with a chittering that made the bones vibrate. Nest. We had walked into a nest. What followed was red and torn. I do not want to remember, but I remember every second. Nerk threw himself at the large one with his machete. He drove the blade into the joint between the second and third segments and hung there with one hand. The devil screamed and curled, trying to reach him with its rear limbs. Nerk let go of the knife, dropped, rolled, grabbed the last rifle Silas had dropped and fired 5 shots into an eye. The blasts burned through soft tissue. The devil spasmed and collapsed, crushing 2 men from second section beneath it. Kestra fired with everything he had, las rifle, pistol, then knife, then fists. I saw him beating a young devil in the soft underbelly with bare hands, covered in yellow-green blood, shouting something no one could understand. I turned to the Magos. He stood motionless. His red lens, the only remaining sensor, flickered, recording everything. Behind him, from the far side of a fallen trunk, Another large one rose, an adult, 15 meters, with heavy mandibles and front limbs each thicker than my thigh. One strike would tear a man in half. I did not think. The body thought for me. The muscles, the reflexes hammered in by 20 years on a planet where any second can be the last. I rushed at the Magos, knocked him down, and covered him with my body. At the moment the front limb came down from above, I put my left arm under it. I remember the sound. Wet heavy, a crunch like stepping on fruit fallen from a tree. Only it was not fruit, it was my arm. The scythe blade passed through forearm, muscle, bone, tendon, and closed. The arm below the elbow stopped being part of me. It simply stopped. I saw it. It lay in the mud half a meter from my face. The fingers still gripped the handle of my machete. Pain came a second later. Absolute. The kind that leaves no room for thought or fear or anything else. Only pain, hot, pulsing, filling the world. Someone fired. Someone shouted. Nerk, I later learned, threw a grenade straight into the open mouth of the adult devil. Old trick, unreliable, but it worked. The grenade blew the chitin head apart from inside. The thing collapsed. I lay on the Magos, pressing the stump to my chest, and blood ran. Warm, fast, too fast. Tourniquet, Nerk shouted, now. Someone tightened a belt above my elbow. It hurt, but the pain was already so great that the new pain sank into it like a stone into a swamp. I lay there and looked at the green ceiling, the crowns of the trees 50 meters above me, the sky behind them gray as always, Catachan sky, my sky. Beneath me the Magos. I was lying across him, pinning him to the ground with my weight. He did not move. I thought he was dead. Then his vox grill clicked softly, and I heard Binharic, quick and monotonous like a prayer. He was praying. A tech priest was praying to his machine god, to the Omnissiah, or to something else. Nerk dragged me off him and turned me onto my back. I saw his face, hard as stone, but in his eyes there was something. Anger, cold Catachan anger, the kind that does not burn but pours, the kind that does not shout but acts. Around us was silence, the terrible silence that comes after slaughter, when everything that could scream has fallen quiet, when the earth is soaked with blood, ours and not ours, yellow-green, stinking of ammonia. The bodies of young devils, 3 or 4 of them, lay among the trees, twitching with their last spasms. The adult devil lay 10 meters away with its head torn open, cloudy fluid still leaking from the ruin. Between the carcasses lay my lads, the ones I had not saved. When I came back to myself, Nerk sat beside me and smoked. A hand-rolled twist of dried lost leaf, local tobacco so strong that a guardsman from any other world would turn inside out after the first breath. Nerk drew smoke and watched me. Losses. He exhaled. Silas, Vel, Bren, Aaron, Kestra, Rusk, Orel, Pavin, 8 of 12. 8. Torin alive, limping. Magos alive, whole, not a scratch. I closed my eyes. 8 men. 8 of my lads. Men I had walked the jungle with, shared emergency rations with, passed a flask of local rotgut too. Men whose nicknames I knew better than their real names. On Catachan we do not weep for the dead. Tears are water, and water here is too precious to spend on those who no longer need it. We remember, silently. It is heavier than crying. 8 names, 8 empty hammocks in the barracks. I opened my eyes and saw Magos Varro standing 10 meters away, looking at my severed arm. It still lay where it had fallen. The fingers still held the machete. His red lens did not blink. It burned steady and quiet. Perhaps I imagined it, but one of his mechadendrites trembled. The one that usually moved with mechanical smoothness. It trembled and sank, as though lowering a head. Night on Catachan is when the gray sky turns black and something poisonous starts glowing from every crack. Bioluminescent fungi, blue, green, sometimes pale pink, cover the trunks. If you do not know they release spores that cause hallucinations, you might call them beautiful. I do not think that. I simply know which side not to stand on. We sat beneath a root ridge, huge as a cargo truck, curving up from the earth and back into it to form something like a shelter. 4 of us, me, Nerk, Torin, and Magos Varro. Of the 4, 2 were wounded. I had a stump where my left hand had been. Torin had a leg that still dragged after the myral venom. Nerk, the only whole fighter left, stood watching the dark with the eyes of a man who sees more in it than others see in daylight. The Magos sat opposite me, or rather half lay against the root. His augmetics were failing. One by one, the systems that had served for decades surrendered to acid, magnetic storms, humidity, and mud packed into every seam. His left leg, the one that had locked in the morning, no longer moved at all. The right worked in jerks. The mechadendrites hung lifeless. The Vox grill rasped and hissed, producing only a third of the sounds he tried to speak. He removed a standard Mechanicus med kit from his belt, with the cog crest stamped into the lid. Inside were no bandages and no salve. Fine tools, surgical clamps, ampules of clear liquid. He came to me. His working hand, the right one, still biological, the only living hand left on his body, trembled slightly. I had not known tech priests could tremble. Bandage, your bandage is inadequate. The tourniquet is placed too high. Tissue below will begin to necrotize. He spoke through the Vox grill, but the sound had changed. Quieter, softer, as if the grill were running on minimum power and something else was coming through it. Something thin, weak, hidden behind layers of metal. He removed the tourniquet. I clenched my teeth. A wave of pain rolled through me like a tide. I breathed through it, counting breaths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On Catachan, pain is currency. You pay with it for every day you survive. His living hand worked slowly, uncertainly, but precisely. He cleaned the wound, put clamps on the larger vessels, flushed it with something from an ampule that burned like fire, treated the stump with antiseptic and wrapped it. Not with a bandage, but with a strip torn from his own robe. Red Mechanicus cloth, sanctified and blessed, wrapped around the severed arm of a Catachan sergeant. I watched him and for the first time truly saw his hand, the real one, the human one. Thin fingers, pale skin that had probably not seen the sun in decades. Nails even, trimmed, clean. Clean nails on Catachan. Then I understood. He had cared for them, the only part of his body that remained alive, and he cared for it as something precious. Magos. Listening. Why did you keep the hand? A long pause. His red lens, the only augmetic still working, pulsed slowly. I am Magos Biologus of the Genitor Order. My speciality is living tissue, living systems. I study flesh, organic matter. I could not replace the instrument of investigation with a prosthesis. A hand that touches living tissue must be living, otherwise the data is incomplete. Can you feel with it? Another pause. Yes. Then he did something I did not expect. He raised the left arm, the mechanical dead one, locked and useless, and tried to move it. The manipulator fingers did not respond. He looked at them for a second, 2 seconds, then opened a panel in his thigh and pressed something inside. The mechanical arm jerked and went limp, detached. Then he moved to the legs. He disconnected the external support augments, the power frames in which he had carried his own legs for decades, one after another, with grinding and the clicks of ports releasing. Heavy metal fell into the mud beside him. Beneath the power frames were his living legs, pale, wasted, with muscles that had forgotten how to bear weight. The joints were swollen. The skin was half-transparent, crossed with blue veins. He tried to stand on them and fell, tried again, fell again. On the 3rd try, Torin silently came over and gave him a shoulder. Magos Biologus Elian Varro, bearer of data from Mars, stood leaning on a Catachan soldier, on his own legs. the same legs he had considered obsolete, unnecessary, weak for decades. Then he spoke without the vox grill. He unlatched the silver plate carved with prayers and removed it. Beneath it was a mouth, a human mouth, thin lips cracked, bloodless, and a voice quiet, hoarse, dry as old parchment. Sergeant Vale. His real voice, without metal, without modulation, without binharic, the voice of a man who had not used his own vocal cords in so long that they had almost forgotten how to work. Listening, Magos. I must inform you, the data I carry, it concerns your planet, Catachan. I was assigned to research the local biosphere. A disputed hypothesis proposes an ancient link between the Catachan biosphere and xenoforms the Imperium later classified as tyrannic type. I was to collect samples and confirm or refute the link. He swallowed. I saw his throat move. Human, living. I came here to catalog your world, to reduce it to data, numbers, classification codes. I believed that was sufficient. I believed data was all one needed to know Catachan. He looked at me with his living eye, the right one, the one that had been hidden behind the plate. I saw it for the first time. Gray, dull, watering. Human. I was wrong. We were silent. In the stillness I heard a stream murmuring 100 meters away, and I knew not to go near it, because water on Catachan is as much a predator as anything else. Sergeant Vale, the Magos, spoke again, almost in a whisper. I have a question, not for the catalog, personal. Ask. Why did you cover me with your body when the creature attacked? You lost your arm. You could have died. The order required delivery of my cargo, the data. You could have taken the container and withdrawn. Why did you cover me? I thought about it, not because I did not know the answer, but because the answer was difficult. Not the kind that fits neatly under, orders are orders. The data container cannot walk by itself. You can. Data without you is a bundle of numbers. You without the data are a living man who knows what those numbers mean. I was not protecting cargo. I was protecting the one carrying it. But I am foreign to you, Mechanicus. Your people dislike us. I know this. I have read reports on conflicts between the Astra Militarum and the Adeptus Mechanicus on Catachan, missing tech priests, incidents with commissars. I know how your people solve problems. I smiled. It hurt. My lips had cracked and the smile stretched the split. True, we do not like people who come here and tell us how to live. Commissars who shout about discipline when you know that 20 meters behind them sits a thing that would make that commissar soil himself before he could draw a bolt pistol. Tech priests who want to carry our samples to Mars and take them apart, without understanding that Catachan is not a laboratory. It is a living, breathing organism that hates you. I fell quiet. But you Magos got out, fell down, and kept walking. Your machines died, your skulls burned, your legs locked, and you kept walking on Catachan. That means more than any rank or any cog on a robe. I have met generals who gave up on the second day. You lasted 3. He was silent for a long time. The fungi flickered. Somewhere far off a branch cracked under a heavy night predator. Nerk shifted his las rifle by 1.5 degrees and froze. Then the Magos raised his living hand and touched the red binding around my stump, the one he had torn from his own robe. On Mars, he said with his cracked voice, we believe flesh is weak, an error to be corrected with iron. I believed this for 30 years. Today your weak flesh covered me from a blow that my metal would not have stopped. Your weak flesh was severed, and still you lived, still walked, still protected. He lowered his hand. I must revise my data. Bioluminescent fungi glowed around us. Blue, green, pink. The night jungle clicked, rustled, breathed. Far beyond the trees came a howl, low and long, like metal being bent. A night predator, distant for now. I lay against the root, my stump burning like fire, my bandana soaked with sweat, the taste of blood in my throat. I had bitten my cheek while he changed the dressing, And I looked at this man who had been a machine for so long he had forgotten the sound of his own breathing. "Magos," I said, "tomorrow we reach the base, if we are lucky." "If we are lucky," he repeated in his true voice. And in those words, spoken through cracked lips, there was something I had never heard from a tech priest. Hope. Ordinary, human, foolish hope based on nothing at all. I closed my eyes. Torrens snored, the fungi glowed. Catachan did not sleep, it never sleeps. We reached the base the next day, close to noon. The last 5 kilometers the Magos walked on his own legs. Torn, shaking, buckling, but his own. Nerk guided him the way I had guided him in the spore fog, holding his elbow, counting steps, warning him of roots. Magos Varro fell 4 times. I walked myself. The stump of my arm was bound in red Mechanicus cloth and the bandage had soaked through, blood and lymph, but I walked. On Catachan you walk while your legs carry you. Then you crawl. Then you are carried or left. There are no other choices. Fort Redbone appeared through the trees. Gray walls of reinforced rockcrete, towers with heavy bolters, a belt of burned ground 100 meters wide around the perimeter, a clear kill zone. Every bush, every blade of grass in that belt is burned every 3 days with flamers, promethium, and sometimes the prayers of a regimental preacher who believes the jungle fears the emperor. The jungle does not fear, promethium works. The gates opened. The guard met us, 6 fighters with las rifles and a lieutenant who went pale when he saw us. 4, from 12-4. Sergeant Vale, 22nd Regiment. Mixed Patrol, 2nd Platoon. Adeptus Mechanicus Cargo delivered alive. Losses 8. The lieutenant opened his mouth, closed it, nodded, and called medics. Then the hospital tent. Smell of medicine, antiseptic, heated metal. The field surgeon, grim and not young, with hands that looked as if they had amputated more limbs than he could count, examined my stump, shook his head and said, "Clean." "Who dressed it?" "Tech priest." The surgeon looked at me, then at the binding of red cloth and said nothing. For 3 days I lay in the hospital. On the 4th I stood. On the 5th I was called to the colonel. Colonel Davin Rowe, old Catachan, scar over scar, left eye glass, right hand a prosthesis. Rough, military, no polish. He sat at a desk buried in papers and looked at me with the look I had seen dozens of times. The look of a man who must ask a question and will not like the answer. Vale losses. 8 from 12, Colonel. Cause. Catachan Devil, nest. We entered their territory, Colonel. I led the patrol on a standard bypass route, but the bypass took us to the nest. You led? Yes, Colonel. He was silent. He tapped his prosthetic fingers on the desk, metal against wood. Tribunal Vale, loss of 2/3 of personnel during an escort assignment. The Munitorum has already drawn up a report. You will answer. Tribunal. I knew what that meant. On Catachan, a tribunal is not the same as on other worlds. We are not shot for losses. Here someone dies every day. But 8 from 12 is a number that cannot be written off as standard combat loss. It is a number someone must answer for. And that someone was me. I was not afraid. Not because I am brave, but because on Catachan death is background like rain noise. You either live with it or you do not live. Nothing else is given. Understood, Colonel. Dismissed. I left, and in the corridor outside the door stood Magos Varro. He was different. His augmetics had been partly restored. The arms worked. The mechanical legs were back in place. But the Vox grill, the silver one with the prayers, was removed. He spoke with his own voice, quiet, cracked, human. Sergeant Vale. Magos. I submitted a report to Colonel Rowe. Responsibility for the losses is mine. Unauthorized deviation from route initiated by me on the 2nd day caused a delay and forced the patrol to move through predator territory. I registered my statement as an admission of fault. with attached data from the escape pod systems confirming the chronology. I stared at him. He stood straight on mechanical legs, back upright, and looked at me with his living eye, gray, dull, watering. Magos, it is not your fault. We hit a nest. This is Catachan. Any route can lead to a nest. It is my fault, Sergeant, and I registered it. He left, his steps heavy and metallic, but a little uneven, as though he was still learning them again, faded down the corridor. The tribunal never happened. Colonel Rowe summoned me 2 days later and said only the tech priest took it all. Munitorum satisfied, dismissed. I returned to the barracks. 8 empty hammocks, 8 pairs of boots standing against the wall. No one removes them until the remembrance rite has passed. On Catachan, we do not pray for the dead. We simply leave their boots in place for a week, sometimes 2, so they know they are remembered. In the 3rd week, a messenger servitor came. A dull machine with dead eyes and a leather apron stained with something oily. It held out a scroll. Magos Biologas Elian Varro requests Sergeant Joran Vale attend the workshop adjoining the medical block. Urgent. I went. The workshop was small, cramped, smelling of oil and heated metal. A bench covered in tools, a vise, a lamp, and the Magos standing in the middle of the mess without his robe, wearing only an undertunic that revealed a thin, pale body covered in implant scars and augmetic port sockets. In his living hand, the right one, the one with clean nails, lay a mechanical arm. But what an arm! I had seen augmetic prosthetics before. Army issue, rough, functional, like an industrial manipulator under a leather cover. This was different. Metal polished to a mirror gleam. Not army steel, something silver-white, light and warm to the eye. 5 fingers like a living hand with joints that moved smoothly as if water rather than mechanism filled them. A broad working palm, textured to imitate the pattern of skin. On the wrist, the cog of the Mechanicus, tiny, engraved with jeweler precision. And along the forearm, from wrist to elbow, engraving. Names: Silas Vel Bryn, Aaron Kestra Rusk Orel Pavin. 8 names cut into the metal, every letter perfect, even deep. The work of a jeweler, the work of a master, the work of a man who had done it with a living hand, the hand that had trembled while dressing my stump in the night jungle. Magos. I made this from the materials of the Pod Primo aerospace-grade alloy, vastly superior to the crude army prosthetics usually issued by the Munitorum. The neural interface is my own design. You will feel with it. Temperature, pressure, texture, almost as with a living hand. He held it out to me. I took it and felt warm metal, light, fitted perfectly to my stump. He had measured me while dressing the wound. Of course he had measured me. He was a Magos Biologas. He catalogued everything. I turned the prosthesis in my hand, in my one remaining hand. Its weight was about 200 grams, no more. Army prosthetics weigh close to 2 kilos. For the first 6 months you walk twisted because one side of the body is heavier than the other. This one was like a glove, like an extension. I noticed a tiny inscription on the inside of the palm, in Binharic and Low Gothic. A prayer. I could not read the Gothic part completely, but I made out 2 words, flesh and remembers. The Magos stood waiting. His living hand, the hand that had probably labored over this prosthesis every night for the last 2 weeks, hung at his side. The fingers had calluses, new, fresh calluses. A tech priest had worked calluses onto his hand by working with his hands. Living hands, no mechadendrites, no servo drives, hands that trembled, tired, and hurt and kept working anyway. The names, I said, and my voice roughened though I did not want it to. Why the names? I registered data on each of your fighters, biometric, physiological, behavioral, but those were data points, database entries, codes in the noosphere. Insufficient. Names are different, names are. He fell silent, his living eye shone. Tears, condensation, I do not know. Tech priests do not have tears, people do. Memory, I finished for him. Yes, memory. I have studied the term. In the biological sense, storage of neural patterns. In the human sense, something more. I cannot yet classify it with sufficient accuracy, but I am working on it. I put on the prosthesis. The neural interface connected. A sting, a short flash of pain, then warmth. The fingers twitched, clenched into a fist, opened. I moved each one. Thumb, forefinger, middle, ring, little. I felt the temperature of the air, wet, warm, Catachan. I felt the texture of the table, rough wood, splintery. I felt the weight of the machete when I picked it up with my left hand, my new left hand, and it settled into my palm as if it had never fallen from it. On the metal forearm were 8 names. I would see them every time I raised my hand. Every time I took up my machete. Every time I struck, they would strike with me. Magos Varro stood watching with his living eye, gray and human. Sergeant Vale, I must return to orbit. The shuttle arrives tomorrow. I know. I want to register one observation for my personal archive, not for Mars. Listening. Catachan is not a death world. I raised an eyebrow. Catachan is a place where death is a condition of life, where every organism from microbe to apex predator exists not despite death but through it. Your planet does not kill, Sergeant. It selects. It leaves those who are worthy. I spent 30 years learning to think like a machine. It took 3 days on Catachan to remember how a man thinks. He lifted his living right hand with clean nails and thin fingers and offered it to me. I shook it with my left, the metal one, the one with the names. And the hand of the Magos Biologus, living, warm, weak, was trembling. But not from fear. The shuttle left at dawn. I stood at the gates of Fort Redbone and watched the gray point dissolve into the gray sky. Nerk stood beside me, smoking, silent. Do you think he will come back? Nerk asked without turning. The Tin Saint, the Magos. I shrugged. The hand with the prosthesis lagged half a beat, as if learning to function again. I do not know. They usually do not come back. They arrive, gather their data, leave. To them we are a database with legs. This one was different. This one. Yes, he was different. Nerk drew in smoke, released it into the gray sky and crushed the stub under his boot. Then he looked at me. Good arm, Vale, better than army issue. Now everyone will envy you. Let them envy. I would rather have my own. Of course, but this is not nothing. With the names it is beautiful. He was silent, then added quietly, so quietly I barely heard him. The lads would have approved. I did not answer. What could I say? Then I went back to the barracks, sat on my hammock and looked at the arm. Silas Velt, Bryn Aaron Kestra, Rusk Orel, Pavin. 8 names on polished silver white metal. They will not wear away. Metal does not forget, and neither will I. Outside the barracks window stood the green wall of jungle. Vines were already reaching toward the fort wall. Slowly, relentlessly, like tendrils of a giant organism that never stops growing. In a week they will be cut down. In 2 they will grow back. Catachan. I clenched my left metal fist. The fingers closed smoothly, exactly as a living hand would. I felt pressure, heat, the pulse of blood in the stump where metal joined flesh. Magos Varro said, almost like a living hand. He was wrong. It was better. It remembered. Tomorrow there would be another march, another route, another patrol. 10 fighters whose names I did not yet know. I would learn them if they lived long enough to earn nicknames, if I lived long enough too. Catachan waits, it always waits. I stood, tightened my bandana, checked my machete and went out.